where I am going to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins and Alex Ovechkin for a moment because I was watching Hyperdrive Hockey a few weeks ago, their third ever episode, and Daff and Max were talking about Sidney Crosby and the legacy of Sidney Crosby, and they both really hit on something for me. Daff was saying that Sid was her first overall pick in fantasy hockey. It was his rookie season. She managed to get the first pick in her first ever draft and picked Sid. And obviously, he had that great rookie season. And I think she said she won. So it like left this indelible imprint. And, he's closer to our age. So you grow up, you're watching this guy's entire career. And the same goes for Ovechkin. And Max hit on the idea that, like, because for millennials, those are our guys, it kind of means something else because we grew up with an NHL where everything was clutching and grabbing. There wasn't a lot of scoring. And the idea that somebody could come into the league and be a generational player that actually puts themselves on the list of like the top players in the history of the game was just not a conversation anybody thought was going to happen. You know, uh, Whether it's people who are on like legacy media, what they're talking about, everything is the 80s, the 80s, the 80s, glorified the 80s, right? Highest scoring era in NHL history. And, in Montreal, maybe it's a little bit more 70s because that's where they were winning more cups. But there's a lot of talk about the past and how great the past was. And you never expect the scoring numbers to come back. But now, as they are, some of those scoring records are up for grabs, one of which being Gretzky's. So I want to talk a little bit about that scoring record because the way that we talk about it, frankly, is wrong. So I'm going to put up a graphic here that I built for everyone. This is Ovechkin and Gretzky, year by year by age. Now, for whatever reason, Canva exported the x-axis weird, but bear with me. These dots are essentially every single age for these players as their career goes on. So, as we know, Ovechkin missed the first 2 years as a teenager playing in Russia. Who knows how many he would have scored in those 2 years, but he's getting close, right? It's going to be one of the biggest moments, maybe ever, in terms of NHL coverage when Ovechkin does pass this record. It's going to be momentous, and it should be. However, the way we talk about it is wrong because they play in different eras, right? When Gretzky was playing, when he scored, all these upteenth amount of goals in the 80s, the average game, you're looking at 8 goals, 7.5 goals every single game, where most of Ovechkin's career, it's been just over 6 or just under 6. So one of the ways that you can actually adjust for era that's, not perfect, nothing is perfect. You can never compare apples to apples, but you can adjust for era by basically normalizing the amount of goals per game in an era or a given season to 6. So you would basically take whatever the number is and what it needs to be multiplied by to get to 6, you multiply the point production or goal production by that same number so that you're adjusting for how many points or goals would this player have if there were less total goals available or more total goals available in the era that they play in. Is it perfect? No. But if we adjust year by year and look at what does Ovechkin versus Gretzky look like if we're actually adjusting for era and trying to put some idea of how far they stand out from their peers on a year-to-year basis. So what does that look like? Well, as it turns out, Ovechkin actually passed Gretzky by the time he was, I think, 30 or 32. 32. And he's actually got quite the lead already. He's way, way ahead in era-adjusted goals. And this is part of the reason why I've been perfectly comfortable with calling Ovechkin the greatest goal scorer in NHL history for a very long time. He is. He has been. He's already proved it. It's really not even close. Ovechkin is going to have this record both by the stats, by the raw stats and the adjusted stats for a very long time. He is that good. And that's why when we're looking at a player like this, there's lots of fawning coverage about Alex Ovechkin throughout his career, but the place in history might actually be underestimated. And that's where I get to Crosby, because we can look at goals, but we can also look at era adjusted points all time. So if I were to take the top, I think I took the top 16 forwards by points, total points in their career, put them in order, and then we can adjust for era year by year for all of them. Here's what it looks like. The data is from hockeyreference.com, and you can see that there's a big change for some players, but mostly it doesn't actually change that much. The adjustment for most players for a full career, scoring goes up and down, and it doesn't really change much. But Gretzky loses a lot. Gretzky loses a lot and still maintains a gigantic lead over every single NHL player in NHL history because he's Wayne friggin' Gretzky. Jaromir Jagr gets a nice boost. You can see some players higher, some players lower. One of the things that I thought was super interesting, because this kind of era adjustment is often criticized as a way to like prop up modern players and cut down players from yesteryear. But Gordie Howe actually played in one of the lowest scoring eras in NHL history and still led the league in points all time until Gretzky passed him in the 80s. So he actually boosts up by era adjustment and goes from, I believe, 4th back up to 3rd, because as you can see, we can switch this to a different view and look at how much of a change the era adjustment actually does for each of these players. So Gretzky loses 463 points and still maintains a lead of over 300 points over Jaromir Jagr, who becomes the second ever player to get to 2,000 points, era adjusted, of course, but puts in context his great career. Gordie Howe jumps up 133 points up to 3rd. Ron Francis drops 114 points down to 4th. Marc Messier drops 200. Sidney Crosby goes from 10th all time to 6th, I believe. Yes, 6th. Gains 52 points, which is really not that many over the course of his career. And Joe Thornton, the undersold, perfectly Gen X player, in that we don't talk about him enough, gains 111 points and jumps up to 7th all time. And Ovechkin also jumps into the top 10 at number 9. Not much change for Joe Sakic, a little bit of a drop for Steve Yzerman, but this is what I'm talking about when we're talking about these young players, or not, they're not young anymore, old players, because they're as old as me or older. We don't talk about how special it's been to watch these two their whole career enough. And we're close now to the end of the Crosby and Ovechkin era, and I get it now when you talk to your old family members of the players of yesteryear and what was so special about them. Watching that happen in real time, watching a player's entire career who's the same age or around the same age as you from beginning to end, is something truly special, especially when they are a not just era defining player, but sport defining player. And I think that's the big thing to hit on with these two is we talk a lot about generational players or superstars, elite, and how that is defined as kind of dependent on the person. But these two are no longer generational stars. These two are historic stars in this game. And that's why I think it's so special that we get to experience watching these two. And, Crosby with another tour de force tonight. Fantastic game. 2 goals. He always seems to put the Habs through it a little bit. But that's all right. We can deal with it, Sid. It's all right.